Subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscription button below. For future webinars and online short courses, please visit our website at australianwaterschool.com.au. Welcome everybody to this last webinar for 2019. The webinar series aims to bring you the many brilliant, innovative projects coming out of the global sector, and today we're going to look at one more of those: how sensor and social networks enabled adaptive water management. We've got Philip Smethurst, Brigid Morrison and Andrew Aldridge to speak with us. Meet them in a moment. My name's Trevor Pillar. I'm the webinar chair for today. Well, this is about you, so have a look at where you all are across the world. There's a map coming up in a minute. There it is. Thanks for joining early, everyone, and by all means start, push that Q&A button and ask some questions, get some comments going. The earlier you start that, the earlier we'll be hearing from you. Any time is good, a good time. It's going to be an interesting time. When farmers and scientists get together and work together closely, although I wouldn't necessarily say perfectly, I suspect we're going to get good outcomes. And today we're going to find some of those outcomes out. And the second thing about today is that the farmers and the scientists work with the regulators in improving the water management. There is a lot of free webinars. Go on our website, have a look at our Twitter feed, and you'll see a lot more coming from where that came from. Dr. Phil Smethurst, Andrew Aldridge and Brigid Morrison, welcome all. Thank you, one and all. They're all located in Tasmania, various parts of Tasmania. Thanks for joining us, everyone. So good to have you. In fact, it wouldn't be the same without you. Dr. Phil Smethurst graduated from the University of Melbourne, University of Florida. Expertise is in soil, hydrology, agriculture, forestry and plant nutrition. Andrew Aldridge is a second-generation dairy farmer in Tasmania, currently chair of Ringarooma Water Users Group and the TFGA Dairy Councillor, TFGA board member. I asked you before what TFGA meant, and it's gone out of my head again, Andrew, sorry.
It's Tasmanian Farmers and Graziers, so it's the advocacy and representative organisation in Tasmania.
So you're not only dairying, you're actually taking an advocacy role and a representative role for all dairy farmers across Tasmania. And in fact, further down, I see also serves on the Farming Systems and Herd Improvement Policy Advisory Group for all of Australia's dairy farmers. That's great to have you, Andrew. Brigid Morrison is from well-regarded natural resource management advisor at University of Tasmania. Works in a split professional academic role to link natural resource reliant industries with research organisations. I couldn't think of a more difficult role to have. Brigid, what do you think?
Yep, it's fun. The fun makes it worth it.
That's what I bet it does. I bet it does. I had some opening remarks there about the big take-home messages for today. Well, for me anyway, maybe for others differently, that farmers and scientists work closely together. Well, I was going to say they work perfectly together, but I'll bet you I'm a bit of smiling going on there. But always aiming for good outcomes, and this one is one of them. And the second thing is having the regulatory bodies and boards involved as well. For right now, I think it's time to hand right over to you, Phil, and you'll hand on to Andrew and Brigid as we go through. That be okay?
Yes, certainly.
All right.
Thank you, Trevor, for the introduction and for this opportunity. And it's great to have the audience along. And please feel free to send your questions to Trevor during the presentation and stop me. He'll judge whether it's appropriate to stop me and for clarification or anything like that. So you all know what the topic is and the presenters, so I won't dwell on that slide. This is a story about a small irrigation community in Tasmania, Australia. Tasmania is, I don't know whether you can see my pointer, is that island off the southeast coast of Australia. And in the northeast of that island, we have the small catchment of Ringarooma, which is based on the name of the Ringarooma River, which drains the catchment. It's a small catchment by world standards, only 974 square kilometres. And in fact, it's only the top half of that catchment, basically, that's regulated. So the tributaries draining from the surrounds go through native forests. Native eucalyptus forest surrounds the cleared valley floor, and there are some eucalyptus and pinus plantations in there as well. But you'll notice there are a lot of on-farm dams. These are filled during the rainy season that basically runs from about May through to November. But rain can be expected in any season, but sometimes it's absent, of course. in that catchment, if it's absent for a week or two, then there start to become some irrigation stresses for either grabbing water and putting it into those storages or actually putting it directly onto crops. And so the cropping season is largely from October through to March. And it's during those periods that flows are reduced, and there are risks that extremely low flows will potentially cause environmental concerns and damage. What did I say? A mean annual rainfall, 1,100 millimetres, fairly high. And let's move on to the next slide. The pressures for this project are much the same in a lot of examples around the world. Pressures on management of water for availability for production and environmental values. And there's a hunger for situational awareness. By that I mean data and knowing how to use those data to inform better decisions. The opportunity came up in this Ringarooma catchment because the community was already well connected to the river. There's a lot of recreation depends on the river. Water supplies, not just for irrigation and domestic stock, but town water supplies as well. So it's a very important asset for the community. There was already interest in adaptive management. There had been for several years or a decade prior to the project, yet not a lot was known about how to go about that. And adaptive management became permitted in the formal irrigation management plan for the catchment in 2012. That's when this project started, and the project ran until 2016. So as I said, there wasn't much of an idea about how to go about this adaptive management because there was an incomplete technical and social capacity there. There was also a funding opportunity from the researchers' perspective through this Sense-T opportunity. So we jumped on that. We're able to attract that funding, and with this being a summary of the main aim of the project, to explore the use of real-time sensor data for adaptive water resources management at the catchment level. So we're not talking about on farms, it's at catchment level for production and environmental benefits. There's several components to the project. First of all, we needed the data. That came from several sensor networks, and by joining these data services together into one data visualization capability, which is the dashboard down at the bottom, we were able to capitalise on that. We mean that those data services were federated, so I'll probably use that word a few times. They came from the State Department, DPIPWE, the National Bureau of Meteorology's private networks, so some farmers had their own weather stations and soil moisture sensors. I come from CSIRO, the National Research Agency. We established a number of weather stations and streamflow monitoring points in the catchment for this project. And the University of Tasmania set up water quality monitoring. So those are the data that were coming in. We also developed forecasts of streamflows, particularly from a process-based model from eWater Source that provided forecasts of streamflows a few days ahead, up to a few days ahead. And a new development for us and many others was machine learning technology. So we developed some and learned how to develop those forecasts there. On the environmental side, there was initial scoping study to determine what were the important environmental variables to monitor, and could they be monitored in real time as part of the sensor network. So eventually settled on temperature as being the most important variable for this catchment in the stream water. We also measured conductivity and dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is extremely important, but it's far more difficult to monitor than temperature, but closely related to some degree. There was also a potential to formalise decision rules and interactions amongst water managers. This This was largely handled within the water user community, which I'll refer to as the Ringarooma Water Users Group, which Andrew is the current leader of, I believe. We displayed the data on dashboards with real-time weather, flow, water quality, and soil water data, and predictions of both weather and flows came onto the dashboard as well. So the main summary page of the dashboard, which is mostly what was used, eventually came to look like this. It's a time sequence from left to right on a daily time step, with today being in the middle. To the left, measured values of the blue line being stream flows on the left-hand axis, and rainfall on the right-hand axis coming down from the top. So the observations on the left, predictions on the right, and an indication of the threshold values that are trying to be maintained, not breached, I should say. So the red line is the actual threshold value, below which it is likely that the regulator would call a cease to take if flows go below that point, because it's too much of a risk to environmental values in the stream. The yellow line is simply a warning level where the regulator sends out a text message to all irrigators to indicate that it might be useful to do something about irrigation management, because pretty soon you might be, if flows continue to decrease, we could breach that threshold. And adaptive management is possible in that phase. The predictions here shown are a short-term, a sub-daily prediction of stream flow coming from machine learning methods, and a daily prediction of stream flows from another machine learning. Okay, so you'll see that sort of view a couple of times as we go through this. This is some shots from the water quality page, so temperature, conductivity, dissolved oxygen, simply temporal trends of those parameters available for viewing. We didn't only concentrate on the point of regulation, which is this marina gauging station at the bottom of that irrigation area, but we developed the dashboard of information for other locations in the catchment as well. And Branksholm is the next gauging station above marina. So flows are overall lower, but you can see there's quite a difference in pattern between these two. Because there are some tributaries feeding in additional water, so flows are generally higher, but the pattern of flow is markedly changed because of irrigation management that goes on between those 2 points. Again, we have the stream flow predictions, sub-daily and daily. We also have a climatology. This is coming from average climate, so it would be the prediction of flows in an average year. So we're actually above at that point that was in June 2016, after this project, by the way. You'll notice there's a threshold value only at marina, because that's the point of regulation. It's not shown at Branksholm because that's not regulated at that point. There was also available rainfall at various different locations around the catchment, both, again, observations to the left, predictions to the right, coming from the Bureau of Meteorology, and some of our own weather stations, actually. And also evapotranspiration, which is a key variable used by irrigators for water irrigation scheduling, amounts and timing. Here's a shot of Andrew meeting with the group and discussing these graphs, understanding the data, and developing effective actions, by which I mean either changing the patterns of the rates of extraction of water from the stream, or actual releases into the stream from some of the large storages that are available in this catchment. So after understanding stream behaviour, the group became confident enough to start to work with it, and also desperate enough, I should say, Andrew, I suppose, because in October, November 2015, flows were way below the threshold value. This is typically the time when they're still filling storages, and flows should be above that value. So it was a seasonal drought, quite severe. The group decided to do 2 voluntary cease to takes, so effectively trying to get all of the irrigators in the catchment to switch off for a 24 or 48-hour period. And they did this twice. On the first occasion, there might not have been complete compliance with that, considering it was a voluntary call, but it wasn't compliant with that voluntary call completely. But the second one looks almost completely compliant. And an interesting characteristic of this feature during low flows is that there's a strong diurnal pattern. So by everybody switching off, that diurnal pattern increased and flows. The diurnal pattern disappeared and flows generally increased. And you can see the threshold values change from month to month. As the season gets drier, the expected flow in the stream reduces as well. That's effectively what that says. And it looks as if by that point in late October, they're effectively heading for to meet that threshold value that was coming up for November. Moving on to the next period, February to May, they were able to maintain these sort of water management options. The cease-to-takes were largely avoided during this period of seasonal drought. That was achieved by reducing and coordinating extractions and those releases. And in turn, that was achieved by through meetings in those large town hall groups or small representative groups at a local meeting point, and coordinated through the text messaging service of the regulator. That's a very important point. That was the point of coordination really to the whole group, and various groupings. So it came down to actually coordinating groups to switch on and off, and in the end, they ended up using 3 groups, I think, in that season. But this was a very successful outcome. Very few cease-to-takes declared, where they actually had to stop extractions, compared to most other catchments in Tasmania at that time that went into total cease-to-take for long periods of time. So that seemed to be a very good outcome. The learnings by the irrigation community came around observations of flows and water quality in relation to the weather and management. So there was a lot of understanding of water behaviour in the system that came out of this. Voluntary cease-to-takes, they learned what those actions would lead to, planned releases, and as I said, they split into subgroups of 3 to manage that event in the end. There was also transparency of flow behaviour, so the information was totally available to the whole group, and we think there was peer pressure there to conform as well. So that's probably an important aspect of this openness. This is a lot of nice pictures, but actually what I want you to look at is this model of level of community participation, which comes out of another state in Australia, Victoria. As adaptive management and participation evolves, it's seen as going from an informed situation to consult, to actually involving the community, and a higher level would be collaborating with the community, and then eventual empowerment that comes with a lot of quite a bit of responsibility actually. So we felt in the early phase of this project we were in this informed consult area, and by the latter stages we'd moved towards involve and collaborate. There were some aspects of empowerment that we saw, but it'd be good to hear Andrew speak to this, but I suspect they don't feel totally empowered yet. It's not a totally rosy story, because we thought we'd try the same across the catchment boundary into this large basin, which is 10 times the area of the Ringarooma catchment that we were working in. However, we found little social connectedness around water management. At that time, there were really complex and uncertain water management issues going on. There was a new water supply, which is dramatically affecting water supplies in the catchment. Water trading, that's not mentioned there. There were changed commercial settings that comes around this water trading. And there was a fair degree of distrust, I can say, relative to what we'd experienced in the Ringarooma catchment. There was also a very significant drought. There was a flood, and essentially it came down to the irrigators having no time to engage with the project, although a number of them said, yeah, it was a good idea, they'd like to come back to that at a later time and try. So even though the dashboard was available, there was no uptake for that catchment. We can describe a technical learning path from collecting the data and sending it, telemetry, to the data platform and how it's all managed there, forecasting methods through process-based and machine learning models, use of the dashboard, and we eventually got to the stage of running modelled management scenarios that would assist a community in understanding the potential, quantitatively understanding the potential impacts of management actions. So I think there's some generic lessons to be learned out of this and key messages. First of all, we found a lot of value in federated publicly available and private data, federating public and private data. We developed new observed and forecast data services. There was a lot of educational learnings around the biophysical behaviour of the catchment and the socioeconomic knowledge or capital in the catchment, and it got to the stage of irrigators understanding what was possible and what was useful in terms of data services and actions. They learned to use those real-time data for better decisions, and I'd like to emphasise that it was a combined social and technical, a combination of social and technical capabilities, and I underline the social because that is the key to achieving success in these sorts of cases. The technical capabilities grow all the time and have developed even further since we did the project. But they can only be there in a supporting way. They can also enable and facilitate some of the social developments. That's a key aspect too. So the social aspects were based mainly on trust, and that was facilitated by those shared data, as I mentioned. The two significant outcomes during the project, there was a change in state government policy that effectively provided adaptive management possibilities across all Tasmanian irrigation catchments under extremely dry conditions. So this was essentially extending the Ringarooma model potentially to all other catchments. We also ran an economic analysis of that season, and out of the 11 irrigators interviewed, 11 out of the 70, there was about $1.5 million Australian dollars of value to those irrigators in that season. Two good outcomes. All right, that was up until 2016. Since then, there have been further developments, both within the catchment and statewide. So within the catchment, I'm going to go now to Andrew to speak to those, and then he will hand on to Brigid to talk about statewide impacts after that.
Thanks very much, Phil. Andrew, sorry to intervene just at this point, but there is a question, and there's one other thing too about the screen. You might be able to get better value out of that screen, Phil. We're seeing the presenter's version of the screen, so that there's a slide and a notes. It's not a worry. It's actually good to follow on with the notes. It's been useful, but we get a better value out of it if it goes.
Sorry about that.
Okay, that's all right. But would this be a good point to ask this question? You might see it on your Q&A board there, Andrew, Phil, Brigid. From Terry, it seems your project has used the word environment to mean abiotic measures, DO, EC, dissolved oxygen, EC, electroconductivity. Did the project account for biotic values, native fish, macroinvertebrates, algae?
Only indirectly, because... Am I getting an echo there? Yeah.
No, that's all good.
Only indirectly, because they are taken as flow itself, and those water quality parameters are taken as proxies for environmental suitability for the biota. Right.
Any other comments on that, Brigid or Andrew? That's all good.
And most of those things are actually, and Chris Cleary, who's part of the regulator, is on the webinar there now,
right.
And most of those are monitored by the regulator. So I mean that is available and could be overlaid in this, but it hasn't been done into this presentation effectively.
Yep, no, that's all right. Brigid's all good. Okay, let's leave it at that then. The other thing is, everyone, if you wish to ask a question on screen, don't hesitate to hit the raise hand icon at the bottom, and my colleague Ian will certainly make sure that happens. We'd love to see you in full living colour. That'll be great. But right for now, we'll go heading straight off towards you, Andrew. That'll be great. Over to you.
Thanks, Trevor, and thanks, Philip, for that. So my brief is to talk about what's happened since since the project finished in 2016, and in reality, we've moved a long way from where we started. This process has been for us, the irrigators and the farmers, has been a process of I think it's been about 16 years, since about 2002 when the water management planning process started, and we're moving very fast now, and it takes a fair bit of my time to make sure this continues now that the project is finished. So effectively, the Ringarooma River is what I class as a short run catchment. The water is in and out of in the catchment and out to sea within 48 hours. So it's a very dynamic, it's a very, pardon the pun, fluid environment, and it needs active and immediate practice change to influence the base level flows in the river. One things that through the process we the community realised, and I sit there. We've got 9 farmers on my management team, and there's about 40 irrigators total, and we've always gone in with the fact that the risks of not being involved were greater than the work involved in actively managing, and we believe that as the on ground managements, we're in the best position to affect any practice change or any environmental change that needs to be rolled out in our catchment. We also felt that the planning process disregarded the knowledge, our local knowledge of our river, and so we got in, and I wasn't personally involved in that. I've taken over since that time. We got in and really made sure that we were consulted and we could have our say and prove that we knew what we were talking about. From our point of view, the project, the largest thing that came out was the social interaction and the upskilling and education, and we believe that is key for us as farmers. That it's not about using a stick; it's actually about upskilling and teaching. And case in point, that when this started back in 2012, there were several farmers that I would never have considered would change their practice. But this year, going into this dry season, the start of this season, and it's not really very dry at the moment. We had one farmer who I would have considered would never have even considered changing their practices or adjusting their pumping times or doing something different. Actually volunteered to practice change. As soon as you need us to do it, we'll do it. Was a comment that was made. We also have learnt that we as farmers in this catchment, although we're pretty interconnected, we're also pretty relational, and we enjoy being relational. And we've had great success working closely with our regional water management officer, and without input from the regulator, I think it would have made our job a heck of a lot harder. He has had the individual knowledge on individual businesses, and so we could plan an action, and then we could bounce the idea off him and see where we needed to go. The other thing that came out of this project was the fact that we actually don't recording something that's passed. It's hard. It's hard to make practice change in the short run catchment after it's been measured. So what we really now need to start to do is to monitor and try and predict, so that when we do practice change, it is going to have the desired effect. The sensors that were put in are fantastic, and we're actually now starting to work with the regulator to actually do a bit more sensory work, and the pulse that you would have seen, the diurnal pulse that was mapped on Philip's screens there before. We're starting a process to try and work out what's actually causing that, and whether we can impact or assess. The regulator here in Tasmania is saying that they believe that's having a serious impact on the quality of the river, and so we as farmers are now doing a joint project with them to try and see if we can we can try and flatten that pulse a bit and actually find out where it's coming from. We're also currently looking now into community storages. That notice there on Philip's slide there that there's new water available from Tasmanian Irrigation. The thing about Tas Irrigation was that their business model is to supply new water for increased agricultural production. And what we're finding at the moment is that due to the pressures on the flows, that water is needed to adjust pumping behaviour, and so therefore it's actually being used to replace water that was already there. The rules of access of that, because it's a state-owned business, the water is owned by the state. The rules are quite regimented, so to actually get hold of the water to do what we need to do with it it can be quite a challenge at some time. So we as a community are looking at another storage, which can be a small storage which is high up in the catchment to share the load, because as Philip said, most of the water releases we've done have come out of individual farm dams, and so that then puts a lot of pressure on individual businesses. And that's basically what it is. But what has happened now, and I was going to take over to Brigid now, was that what we are doing is actually influencing what is happening in a statewide perspective. And for a better information on that, I'll now hand over to Brigid, and she'll take you through the impacts we are seeing in the state.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm really pleased that Philip was able to describe the technical achievements, and you've just illustrated how that was affected on ground, and that one of the biggest outcomes of the work was the shared knowledge and learning that occurred between the scientists and the farmers was fantastic to be a part of. So I'm just going to touch on now the more recent developments at a statewide level, and I believe my colleague from the Department of Primary Industries in Tasmania is also online, and so I'm just going to be describing those. A new data service that was created by that department after 2016. So you'll see, yep, that was good, Philip, if you can click over to that slide again. So late last year, a new data service was provided, the Water Information Tasmania web portal that was created by the Department of Primary Industries, Water and Environment. You'll see those are all the gauged catchments and streams in Tasmania, and for many of those that data is now available. Philip, if you flick over again to the next slide, please, you'll see that the flows, the water availability is made available, and one of the really important improvements with the government's version of this data, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a data grade function, and what that does is indicating the quality and the robustness of the available data. So one of the things that we found in the Sense-T project in the Ringarooma was that we could provide all sorts of data, but stakeholders found it really important to be able to understand what the quality of that data was and how well they could rely on it. So that's an excellent addition there, I think, and I'd be really interested to find out how stakeholders are using that information. So again, this web portal for some locations has parameters such as dissolved oxygen, turbidity, temperature, and so on. And so for any stakeholder now, really they should be able to access that data and query it and understand the impacts of variations in flow on those environmental proxies. So as one of the participants earlier identified, yes, we are using those abiotic variables to indicate environmental values. And part of the reason for that, to go back to why those data were conceived, in 2012, this project commenced from a Sense T, which was all about sensors and how could communities and different industries employ sensor and big data technologies to build resilience in their industries and capacity in their industries. These were the parameters that were identified by community stakeholders as important to be able to understand, because these were the parameters that were being used to regulate the water resource. So it was really about providing that sort of information. What was also really important that Andrew alluded to was the shared understanding of what kind of data was important to make decisions on in terms of water resource use. And that was, I think the scientists learned absolutely just as much as the farmers did about how to use data, what was actually important, and what the opportunities were with it going forward. So if we can flick over to the next slide, Philip. Another development that occurred more recently in September of this year was the publishing of the new guiding principles for water management planning in Tasmania, which is a new policy that sets out the guiding principles and includes how stakeholders can be involved in the development of statutory water management plans. I think it's important to flag this document as emerging alongside the availability of ubiquitous data, if you like, that everybody can have access to. So if all of those data are available to farmers and irrigators, they're also publicly available to the community. So this document really reflects somewhat of a shift to enabling adaptive management, and recognises as one of its principles the importance of shared knowledge. So those were the important things that I wanted to flag, which I think probably concludes the presentation, and we could take some questions.
Thank you, Brigid. That's really good, and there's acknowledgements there too from a large number of people. That's been a huge team effort. That's been fantastic. There are some questions coming through, and one on screen as well, if we can do that as well. Terry, thanks for your coming on screen to talk with us. Beauty. Fire away, Terry.
I'm keen to see what the historic flow regime looked like compared to what you think you've achieved now. So that's the historic patterns of flow peaks and flow troughs.
I could start to answer that, and then maybe Andrew could jump on. That's Terry, a really good question, and it's quite a huge data set.
Yes.
That would need to be analysed. We've got some understanding, just observing what those might look like. I don't believe any formal analysis has been conducted on that. But the data would be there to do it, which is the beauty of big data and the ability to be able to multi-purpose it.
Any more comments from yourself, Andrew or Philip, around what Terry's?
No, nothing from me.
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, Terry. Are you talking about the flow, the historical flow, daily flows? You're talking about the seasonal flows?
Probably more the seasonal flows. So my experience is from southeastern Australia on the mainland, and typically rainfall occurs in a Mediterranean type climate style, so winter rainfall. Most of the abstraction occurs then to store water in the dams, and then water is released for irrigation late spring, early summer. And there's a disconnect there in terms of some of the key recreational fish species that actually need high-ish or steady water flows in mid to late winter, early spring. And essentially, that's the time of year when we're actually holding water back in the dams to store it for delivery a little bit later. So there's a kind of disconnect there in terms of the ecological processes, the broader ecological processes. So I guess it's the seasonal patterns of flows. So it's a comparison there.
So a lot of what the project worked on was actually it was the summer period. Effectively it was their irrigation team. So October, November through to March, April. So we didn't do a lot of work in that. Now there are dams, and we have seen a drop off of rainfall. Effectively, most of the flow regimes that we were doing is from that discharge and recharge from the river. So it's not actually a lot of the irrigation that is done out of it, and a lot of the extraction is actually direct extraction out of that summer period. There are some storages. There are places in the catchment that are just not suitable for dam storage, which is why we'd like to make one big one up the top to do that. And so I'm not 100% sure how to answer your question about that shoulder period.
Should we go off? Should we use the time off of the webinar, out of webinar, to go a bit further into that? Would that be all right, Andrew, Terry?
Yeah.
There's a few more questions coming up, and the time's pressing on. We've only got about 10 minutes left to make the whole hour. But look, I'd like to call in Chris Cleary. Thanks, Chris, for your hand up there. If you could come on screen now and give us a comment or a question that you had to go, that'd be great.
Look, you just said that you'd take that last question off screen, but I thought I could add just a little bit of explanation.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Chris. Yeah.
I'm the planner, and I was involved in the plan development. So the planning process took into account and looked at the flow that had historically been in the system. And I guess in setting those access rules and arrangements, that was part of the consideration in looking at what the natural flow and the seasonality of flow was, and those access thresholds vary month by month to try and maintain those features of the flow that are naturally there. So there has been an analysis done, and the reports are available on the department's website under water management plans. And as well as that, I think CSIRO undertook a fair bit of analysis and forecasting work in terms of future flows and impacts of climate change on flow, which were also used in the planning process to make some of those assessments of likely risk.
Now, look, thanks for your comment on this, Chris. Is there any other comment around that? There's a couple other questions you'd like to get to. We've got about
all.
5 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's good. Andrew or Brigid, Philip, any comment around what Chris is saying?
There's some excellent data sets that are available, and having the opportunity to coordinate all of those data will be absolutely worth doing.
Righto. Well, look, let's press on here. Did we get that? What did the historic flow regime? I think we got that. Yeah, we did. Another one here from Katrin. How have the farmers changed their monitoring practices as a result of the project? I had in my mind, why did they cease to take? What drove them cease to take? How did they change their practice? That's what Katrin's getting at here. It's a good question. Andrew.
Well, the reason we ceased to take, we implemented those things is one. We couldn't find any model to run for. So we were making up the plan as we went along.
Right.
And the river was dropping towards cease to take levels. And we were basically told, well, if you don't do something, then you'll be shut off. So what we as the community did was this is an action we can do. So everyone stopped on one day, and what we saw happen was something very similar to a flushing flow from about a 5 mil rainfall in the catchment. So we saw a peak, and that's where we started, and we now don't do them anymore. We change individual irrigators. We change individual irrigators. We do other things. We do dam releases. We've come so far in 4 years that I can hardly remember why we did what we did when we did it. And I look at it and go, well,
Yeah, no, that is an amazing thing, and I can hear others feeling the same way. That changing farming practices is incredible. There's a couple more questions, and then we'll give it a miss, I think. Stephen's asked, please may I know if the data services address. Please may I know if the new data services address how technical water quality data, such as turbidity, is presented to facilitate stakeholder participation. How do they come to do what they do is what he's asking. You can see the question there, everybody. It goes on a bit longer, but if you just have a quick look at the Q&A, you'll see where Stephen's going with this. How do they get to know about the turbidity?
I could have a quick first go at this, but I think it also
maybe a short one is a good one. Yep.
Yeah. These water quality parameters are only measured at a few locations, or even if it maybe at one location in some of the catchments or not at all. But even where we have more than one in a catchment, it's probably not the resolution needed to tease out where individual sources of water are affecting that water quality parameter. Turbidity in this catchment was an issue. It's quite a clear water stream, but as we said before, temperature and DO were the main issues.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
And I think it's really important to flag that the sensors and the data, the technology, the modelling and the predictions, they're all absolutely wonderful, but on their own, they don't do very much at all. They don't achieve very much at all. You've got to be able to build in the soft skills around how to understand how to use and how to collaborate. So one of the last questions was, how do the farmers do it? Well, the farmers did it by SMSing one another. They'd have meetings at the pub on Sunday afternoon, and they would coordinate their activities and discuss what worked for that week and what didn't work for that.
What would you say to that, Andrew? What would you say to that?
Well, that's exactly what we did. We sat down and went, well, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. We're down to our last few minutes, everybody, so we might call it that. I'm sitting here with a burning question because I always follow the money trail. If there was a multi-million-dollar value, did it go back to the farmers? All right, don't have to answer if you don't want to. But
that was the assessment of the farmer, the value to the farmers.
Gotcha.
By interview.
Yes.
Data.
Didn't just go back to the farmers. It went back to the community.
Gotcha.
So it's not just us, and it's not just the farmers that benefit from it. I mean, one of the first actions we took was we tried to cease to take. There's a community event called the Derby River Derby, which runs down the Ringarooma in October, and we ceased to take, and we tried to give them a wave to take their swim down the river on.
Fantastic.
Now, we missed it by 3 hours, but we tried.
Yep, no, all power to you. There's a bigger picture going on here. Well, we won't go any further with that. Terry or Chris, if you've got a last closing comment, you're certainly welcome. The lines are certainly open for you both.
Just a comment, and
Terry.
I think Brigid understands my question around flow regimes. Brigid, I think if you could understand and present the historic seasonal flow regime against the current, what you're doing now as a result of this change behaviour, and relate to that improvement back to an organism that the community care about, a platypus or a native fish breeding event, and demonstrate that you're improving environmental outcomes for a real tangible thing, that actually might be able to help sell your work to a broader community.
Yep. Thanks for that.
All right, that's good. Nothing else, Chris? All good with your end? All right, then. One thing I do want to do is just keep faith in everybody who answered those questions. That's terrific. I really appreciate everybody being here today, and we look forward to being at the next webinar, and we'll keep in touch for that. Thanks, Philip. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Brigid. And thanks, everybody, for being part of this webinar today. Bye for now.
Subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscription button. For future webinars and online short courses, please visit our website at australianwaterschool.com.au.